Good morning, Belvidere first. Good morning, people of Belvidere, Rockford, and the surrounding areas. My name is Pastor David Paul Smith here at Belvidere First Assembly of God, or as we like to call ourselves, B1. Having our weekly morning devotional on the subject of anger management. We've been on Genesis the past couple of weeks as I wanted to take a little detour and talk about some of that. But we are now back with our anger management. Now, I will say this. It's always more clinical or more by the book when I'm doing this here as a podcast versus what we actually do in the class on a Wednesday night. Last night we had a lot of funny stories, a lot of hard stories, a lot of emotional stories shared about how anger manifests in families and in marriage. And so today is it's not really a recap of that. It's more for the people who weren't able to be at the class last night, or for those of you that are working from this at home. If you need it, there is a book by Living Free called Anger, Our Master or Our Servant that we actually use as our textbook. And they are basically built for 90-minute classes, and of course we only do 60 minutes on a Wednesday night, so a lot of times we have to split it in half. This one is no exception. We are actually going to have to split this in half between the self-awareness and spiritual awareness, and what that ends up meaning is that a lot of the more going through Scripture and seeing what Scripture says we're going to do next week, whereas this week is going to be basically applying Christian principles to the anger management skills that we've already been learning thus far, and of course taking another step further. We had a lot of the conversation was just, and I have to be careful because we're never going to say anything in this that was revealed in confidence at one of the meetings, because that is definitely one of the big things, is that everything there is private. But I know there are a lot of you that go through this with me there. And good morning, Sammy. Sammy, can you just relay anything funny because I know you said some hilarious stuff, you and Bobby both, and since you can basically speak for Bobby, so if you have some things that you want to add about what was spoken about last night from yours, not what somebody else said, but the stuff that you said or Bobby said or you remember me saying, please chime in with that. And hopefully this will be a lot of fun. Anger is actually a very serious thing. Everybody struggles with it on some level. It's like this. Sometimes in marriage counseling or just in regular counseling, somebody will come to me and say something along the lines of, we're getting a divorce or we're splitting up or doing this and that. And I'll be like, man, are you okay? And, oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. And I'm like, you know what? I have never been so okay that I divorced my wife. I don't get that. Not just divorce, but in conflict and things like that. You see people going through deep conflicts and you're like, hey, are you okay? And just in order not to have to deal with it or talk about it, they will assert that everything in their life is fine and there's absolutely nothing to worry about. As a pastor, I say that sometimes you start your service understanding that no matter what your altar call is, there are some people that are just never going to come to that altar call. They are never going to come down to the front. And of course, in our church, we do altar calls differently. It's not just a, hey, my life is messed up, but for us, that altar is the place where man meets God, right? Where we stand in his presence and we feel him and we know him. And so I always worry about people that never, ever want to be down at the altar. In the same way, I worry about people who, when you say, hey, we're talking about anger or things like that, they're like, well, I don't really have a problem with it. I don't really struggle with it. Most of the time, maybe they don't struggle with it, but their spouse, their friends, their family, those who are around them actually do. The opening question last night was to describe your family context. What was the second question, Sammy? Good morning, Robin. How are you? We had two questions. One, describe your family context. And we had a funny second question. I don't remember what that is now. Sammy, if you remember that, put that in the message board for me. So we're gonna go through the book, use this as our textbook. I'll stop and talk about kind of what it's going over and explain some of this as we go along. It says it's realistic to expect that most couples will experience anger in their marriage and with their children. If you have never experienced anger in your marriage, I don't know that I believe you. As I am pretty sure that was our second question. Everybody experiences anger in their marriage. I said not only what is your family context, i.e. who is your immediate family, what was your struggle food, right? Your poor food. What was the food? And so if you're watching this, put this in the comments. When you were growing up, we all had what we call our struggle food, meaning when mom and dad didn't have enough money to put something on the table or was a tight payday or however that went. For those of us that had that kind of upbringing, what was your struggle food? For us, I think my favorite struggle food would have been the macaroni and tomato sauce, right? Like instead of macaroni and cheese, Mom would make macaroni and tomato sauce with just enough beef in there to flavor it, if we had it. As some of the, I mean, my parents ended up doing really well for themselves and all of that. But early on, we had the struggle food ones. But somebody said pigs in a blanket was theirs. Hot dogs and beans was theirs. Of course, my grandma Smith would always, whenever we went over there, would always give us hot dogs, just uncooked hot dogs out of the package from the refrigerator, and we just, that was our struggle food there. So if you're watching this morning and you hear me say this and you have a chance, type in, what was your struggle food growing up? Now listen, it's realistic to expect that most couples will experience anger in their marriage and with their children. We need to have adequate and accurate information in dealing with anger in our marriage and families. Disagreements and conflict are inevitable. Marriage forces us to come to terms with our spouse needs and submit our weaknesses to another person. That submit our needs to another person. Understand, I know the Bible says, wives, submit yourself to your husband, but also the Bible says submit ourselves one to another. And that includes husbands submitting yourselves to your wife, especially when it comes to things like emotions and feelings and things like that. Not dealing with them and setting it aside. We have vegetable soup and kidney beans and bacon, right? The least amount of meat and the most amount of vegetables because the vegetables were cheaper. That we are supposed to submit to one another, and that means being able to express our feelings, not just the angry feelings, but the feelings that are behind the anger, and we're going to talk about that a lot today. It says, if you're an intense person, you can experience intensity and pain and or pleasure. I always tell people, if you're a person of appetite, and those of you that are people of appetite know what I'm talking about. If a little is good, then a lot is better. The people that they're the reason why they're always impulse buys at the counter, because any other shiny thing they want to grab and throw in the cart. They live life intensely. They feel things intensely, and they often express things intensely, even when it's going to hurt other people. Good morning, Bev. Yes, we've been praying for you, Bev. I hope you are feeling better. I hope everything has gone well with the surgery. I've heard good reports from Colleen. And so we're still praying for you. So the area of anger in marriage is a broad topic. David Mace actually says this. This does not mean you have the right to be angry. In an appropriate situation, your anger could be a lifesaver. Anger enables us to assert ourselves in situations where we should. Anger exposes antisocial behavior in others. Anger gets wrongs righted. In a loving marriage, however, these measures are not necessary. So what does that mean? It means, one, you don't have the right to hurt somebody because you're mad. Right? You don't have the right to be angry with somebody just because your feelings are pointing in that direction. Anger is good because it forces you to make a stand. It forces you to say the things that need to be said. There are times where somebody says something that is wrong. Somebody was saying the other day, they were saying, yeah, this guy said this, and my pastor said, I said, did your pastor really say that, or did he think it? He goes, well, I think he just thought it. Yeah. See, anger is that thing that takes us from that place where when someone does something really bad or really dumb, it takes us from this place of thinking about the response to actually, let's be motivated to do something, to say something, to make this thing right. Anger is the thing a lot of times that will get us over that hump in order to get the right things done. The problem, of course, in marriage is there's two things. One, I hear this all the time, I don't feel heard, right? A lot of anger is expressed because the other person doesn't feel like they're being heard in the relationship, that they are saying things. And I'm going to say this, it's not just the responsibility of the person listening, but it is the responsibility of the person speaking to be able to communicate in a way that that person can hear, because I see a lot of times where someone is communicating in the way they want to communicate, like I want to say these things. But the problem is they're not saying the things that are actually bothering them. They're not saying the things that are actually going on. They're just going with the emotion of it, and they're just going with the feeling of it, and they're just kind of jabbing with it instead of actually digging in and saying, this is what's really going on with me. The other thing is a lot of times people use anger because they want to be in control. When the situation feels out of control, they can a lot of times use anger to bring everything in control, or at least to silence the people around them or bring the people around them to do the things that they feel because of their anxiety and stress that needs to happen. And again, you can do a whole lot of damage to other people and to your relationships by going in that direction. And good morning, Linda. It is good to see you this morning. And here's my question. Is your spouse, are the people in your life allowed to disagree with you? And by that I mean not just not agree with you and be quiet about it, but actually express a different opinion, and you listen to that different opinion, and do you allow other people to change your mind? one of the things I see in leadership and in ministry is if I have somebody who is uncorrectable, if no one's ever allowed to change their mind, if they always, not only they have a compulsion to be right, but if they can never be taken off of the hill of I'm right and everyone else is wrong, that is always a huge danger sign that that person should not be in a position of authority. And so I'm always very, very careful with that type. I'm just checking real quick here. Okay. So here's what it says. My wife is not my enemy. She is my friend, and it does not help either of us if I treat her as an enemy. What I said is the old illustration that I heard growing up, where a man comes into the office and tells the minister, you know what, Pastor, it's over between me and my wife. I'm leaving her. This is just not working out. I can't do this anymore. I'm not in love with her. I'm in love with somebody else, yada, yada, yada. And the pastor says, well, I hear what you're saying, but biblically the Bible says you have to love your wife. So whatever's going on, you have to love her. And he goes, well, you don't understand. She's not even like my wife. She's like a stranger. She's just a person who lives in the house. I mean, we live in the same house, but we don't communicate or talk or have anything between us. She's just another person. And the pastor looks at him and says, well, the Bible says you have to love your neighbor. And he says, no, it's not even like she's my neighbor. I mean, I can't stand her. Everything she says makes me mad. It drives me crazy. I can't, I just can't stand the sight of her. It just gets me. And he says, well, the Bible also says you have to love your enemy. And so the guy came to realize there's no, I don't know if he came to realize, actually at that point, he probably just stormed out as angry people do. But that is just it, that as Christians, we're not allowed to put anybody on the enemy side outside of the enemy, outside of the real enemy, which is the devil, the Satan, the enemy of our souls, versus actual people. Because most people I have found are not trying to be evil or trying to hurt. They're just being selfish, which I get it. Sometimes being selfish and being evil are so close together that it's hard to distinguish the two. Good morning, Penny from the West Coast, which it's got to be, you got to be like 6 o'clock there. So good morning. Bobby and I discuss our differences, and we bring facts and data. Yes, Sammy, and you would never, ever raise your voice at Bobby. I say that because Sammy is like me. She's very expressive. So I'm just assuming, Sammy, there's some very expressive conversations between you guys from time to time, as well with the kids. John, test our patience. Kids do test your patience, and what really drives you crazy is when they act like you do. Like, who taught you to act like me, right? Anyway, it says, my wife is not my enemy. She's my friend, and it does not help either of us if I treat her as an enemy. So I say I'm angry with you, but I don't like myself in this condition. I don't want to strike you. I'd rather stroke you, right? I don't want to be mad at you. I actually want to be close to you. And what you're doing here is you're renouncing the anger on one side to prevent the rush of retaliatory anger on the other side, the resulting tendency to drift into what I call the artillery duel. And everybody knows what the artillery duel is in an argument. The artillery duel is when both of you start bringing out the long litany of all the things the other person has done wrong, or how they have behaved, or why it's all their fault, and you're firing and firing and firing until one of you is willing to stop. But it says, if I present my state of anger against my wife as a problem I have, she is not motivated to respond angrily. Instead of a challenge to a fight, it's an invitation to negotiate. So this is where we talk about being aware of your anger, being aware of your feelings. And we're going to talk here in a second how to get to that place. But mainly to come to the other person not as you're wrong and it makes me angry, or you did this and it makes me angry, or this, but come to them like, I'm angry right now. The reason I feel angry is because the situation makes me feel like this. I do love you, but right now I'm really struggling with how I'm working through this. And then it puts them on the side of, let's work through this together and help one another, versus trying to blame the other person, make your feelings their fault, make what you're going through on them, and attacking them. So the question is, can you remember the first episode you had as a married couple or a family member? And we had a lot of different answers to this. Of course, one of the questions I threw in there, throwing my own questions in there, what is the funniest or weirdest thing you have ever thrown while in an argument? I actually asked some people on the way out of church. I think some of the big ones were someone threw a shopping cart at someone. And I'm like, well, I guess I admire the effort that it takes to go pick up, and throw a shopping cart. Now, with my wife and I, we had many years ago what we call the famous Cheeseburger Fight, in which I lost my temper and I threw a cheeseburger. I don't know what I thought I was going to accomplish by throwing said cheeseburger, but somehow in my mind, throwing cheeseburger equaled proving my point. And unless my point was how much I don't like cheeseburgers, I don't think that actually worked or won anybody over. Luckily, I have a wife who is as committed to our marriage as I am, and we eventually worked that out. And honestly, this is the funny thing. I can't tell you what that argument is about, but I know from our conversation after church last night, she remembers what that argument is about. But then she's like, I'm not going to bring it up because she didn't want to rehash it or however that looks. So I don't know what's going on with her, you know. Just don't give me a cheeseburger when I'm angry, apparently. Anywho, so it says this: the following areas seem to be the battlegrounds of anger. Unfulfilled expectations, right? You're expecting one thing to happen and the other person is going the opposite direction. A lot of that is built into our own biases and prejudices, and oftentimes, I would say that as a pastor, one of the funny things is a lot of times people put you on the hook for unexpressed needs, meaning they don't say what their need is, but they expect you, the pastor, to, you know, discern it, figure it out. I mean, I love my church. I pray for my church. I call out the names of our leadership and the people in our church all the time in prayer. But sometimes they're going through things that I don't have any idea about. And if they don't tell me, I don't know. But what's funny is sometimes we'll go through stuff and just assume people in the church will know, and then get mad when those expectations aren't fulfilled. Unfulfilled needs, differences in backgrounds. We were talking about how people coming from different family backgrounds, how anger was expressed in different ways, and different families come together, and arguments that come up from that. The way we give and receive love. We've talked about love languages before and some of the other ones. And sometimes when you're expecting love in one way and they won't offer it to you in that way, there's a source of anger there. Money and sex and communication, big threes in arguing in marriage. I mean, I think some of our first arguments were over money. It's funny, we don't argue over money anymore, because she manages it all. I just ask her if I have the money for something or if something's going on. I had to learn to let control go of that. Growing up, I think money was seen as a sort of, a form of identification. If I have enough money, I'm good. If I don't have enough money, I'm bad. Don't want to feel poor. I want to feel like I can afford what I want. If I want a thing, then I should be able to get it. And you know what that leads you to? That leads you to credit card debt. That leads you to all kinds of bad financial decisions. Sometimes you can want a thing financially and just not get it. I know, shocking. I was shocked myself to find that out, but it is true. It says taking your spouse for granted, man. A lot of spouses, especially if you're the service person in that relationship, meaning you're an acts of service, giving of gifts type of spouse. You're the one that loves to do things for other people to show them how much you love them. If they're not acts of service people in return, you can feel like, everything I do for these people and they do not appreciate it and they don't care, and you feel unloved because it's not being returned to you in the same way, and that can cause arguments, fatigue, and time pressures, right? Life itself can just get in our way. The physical demands and job stress, sleep deprivation, dual careers, all sorts of things. Now, I talked about 2 fights that every spouse at least understands on some level. I think everyone who's ever been married and been in the car with your spouse understands this argument. You're on your way to somewhere, probably church, but you could be on your way to anywhere, and the argument goes something like this. Let me out of this car. I will walk. I don't want to be in this car anymore. Just stop the car. I'm getting out. I'll call a cab. I'll walk from here. Whatever has to happen, I am out. Every time I tell a married couple that, they just look at me like, yeah, we've had that argument that I don't want to be in this car anymore type of argument, right? Obviously, both sides have lost at that point, right? The other argument was this one. I always say that when you have the one person who is very expressive with their anger and the one person who is non-expressive with their anger, they're internalizers. This person's trying to get a reaction out of this person. This person's building a bigger and bigger shell to stop hearing the voice of this person. And finally, this person knows they're about to explode. They're about to break that shell. So they start walking for the door. They walk for the exit. They're trying to get out of here because they understand that they're about to not be good with their anger. And then that other person goes and stands in their way. Right? Like, this fight isn't over yet. And I could tell you that some of the worst abuses I've heard of in marriage happen right at that point, where one is trying to walk away and the other is trying to stand in their way to continue the fight. That is where it gets bad, because then the fight or flight really kicks in, and then things can really go to a bad, dark place quickly. All right. Power and control seem to be the overriding issues in the Issues that lock couples into the endless war, and like a game of tug of war, they will stubbornly continue to fight for their victory. And anger is a vital energy used to achieve it. The biblical concept of marriage is built on the principle of submission to one another in love, but does this involve conflict? Yes. Yes, you are going to have conflict even if you really, really love the other person, because sometimes you're just going to desire two different things, and you're going to have to figure out how both of you can feel fulfilled in that desire, even if you don't 100% get your own way. If getting your own way is the key goal of your life, it's going to be a long, hard journey for you. Biblical marriage is built on submission one to another. That means you take your needs and you set them aside and say, I want to work together for the good of both of us, not just for my own good. For whatever reason, our society has just become so obsessed, not just in being selfish, but in pursuing selfishness as an end on its own. Like the more that I get for me, the more people recognize who I am, the more that they, kind of mold themselves around my identity. That's what we're looking for. But the Bible is not like that. The Bible is saying that we set aside ourselves, pick up our cross and follow him, and that we submit to one another and lay aside our own rights to be angry in order to love someone else. Which, by the way, just as an aside note, I've kind of noticed this too. I think Christians have gotten really, and I think because when growing up, right, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, where Christianity was the majority religion, where the majority of people would say, hey, I'm a Christian, even if they weren't, right, they would still claim to be a Christian, that on the other side of that was all the sort of bad behavior that comes with somebody who says they're a Christian but isn't really a Christian, and so they're not actually acting according to Christian principles. But even at that, I will tell you, in our church, where we have a large population of our church that was not in any church before, you have all different levels of spiritual development. You have people that have been in the faith, growing in the faith, pursuing after God, whose lives have been just changed by him over time. You have other people who've just started in the faith and still have all kinds of issues and problems. And yeah, they'll tell people they go to church and they'll witness and all of this, but they still have a lot of stuff going on in their life that you might look at them and be like, and you call yourself a Christian. Listen, we call ourselves a Christian because we are committed to being conformed into the image and likeness of Christ, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen all at once. But I will say this, that if I meet someone who's pursuing Christ, they are objectively a better, nicer, more loving person than the other people I meet out in the world that are not, and that is just the observable truth as I have seen it in my 49 years, and that's just how it is. So, in a healthy marriage, a couple can express conflict from time to time. The marriage commitment requires you to look at yourself for selfishness and your mate's self for selfishness. Thus, what he wants and she wants, and what he needs and she needs, and what he expects and she expects erupts into disagreements and arguments. In our culture, we favor independence and self-reliance. Little value is placed on cooperation, flexibility, and giving in to achieve the greater goal, yet we all struggle with problems we cannot solve by ourselves. One, isolation is a poison. Two, the idea of independence in our culture, the self-reliance, the I don't need anybody else, live your own truth, right, and be your own person and find your own way kind of thing is a lie. I mean, it's just not how society works, and what that really leads you to is a very lonely, isolated, cutting everybody out of your life sort of place. And I think if you came down to some of the key things that are going wrong with our society in general, is the increasing real isolation with the illusion of connection, that we take things like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and we say that we're connected because we see other people on these things, but we don't have a real relationship with most of those people. We don't actually know them in real life. We don't modify our behavior for them because we're not around them. You modify your behavior, you figure out there's just some stuff about you that you need to suppress and you need to push down. Not every desire you have is a good desire, and you have to learn to get rid of some of the desires in order to have the connection with people that's truly going to bring you to that place of happiness. And of course, our society teaching us more and more that it's all about our desire and all about what we want and all about our self-actualization is just further increasing the amount of isolation we have from other people and causing us to be more lonely and then angry when we understand that, right? And then with no way to truly express it. Magandang umaga, Teresita. Good to see you this morning. Hey, Annette, good to see you. Good to have you on board. So it says growth and maturity develop when we work through our problems and conflicts together. Removing ourselves from the issue or our mate may mean less anger, but it always lessens the intimacy and potential for the couple's growth. So many marriages fail not because people have married the wrong people, but because they are not being the right people, right? It's not that you married the wrong person. It's that you haven't made yourself the kind of person in marriage who can make this work. As I have said, fix you, love them, right? We need the freedom in our marriages and families to express anger and hurt in a loving and truthful manner. Again, we've said that anger tends to get expressed around the people that you feel the most comfortable and trusting to express anger around. A lot of people don't express anger at their jobs because expressing anger at their jobs would get them fired. And so they take all that pent up anger home and they find somebody who is going, is kind of trapped with them. And then they express that anger all over them and just destroy the relationship by constantly vomiting out all of the frustration that they have with everybody else onto a person whose fault it is not and who would, given the chance, love and work through them with it. But instead, they make everything that battle. I feel this way, therefore you will pay because you're trapped with me. And man, what a terrible, terrible state of existence that can be. Which is why we deal with things like anger and how to deal with it in a healthy manner. And we're going to get almost there, all right? It says, and if you can type this in for me, name 2 areas in your marriage or family that seem to stimulate angry episodes between family members, right? One, I say when the... One of the things that I notice is when a partner internalizes two types. I've seen those that internalize, meaning everything you say they take as, even if you're talking about yourself, they're taking it as their fault. This is going on. This is a situation. And they're like, well, he's blaming that situation on me. She's blaming that situation on me. And that's why they're doing that. And it builds like a resentment. Or the other one is a lot of times too, I know people who want to vent all the time. They're just always venting. They're always, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Kind of have that complaining thing going. One of the problems they have in their relationships is if you have somebody that really loves you and you're telling them all of the things that are going wrong, that person wants to fix it. That person wants to help. They want to do something. As a guy, I want to Captain America in this. Who do I need to go? What do I need to go punch? Do I need to go punch this situation? Do I need to go, what can I do? And sometimes it's really hard and you feel a deep sense of frustration when someone is expressing something to you that you cannot fix or change. And sometimes we have to change the amount of communication there. Sometimes I've actually had a conversation with my wife before where I've just said, you know what, I can't take any more negative into my soul right now. I understand there's some things we need to deal with in home and at church, but I really need us to back down for a second and give me some time to process what I'm already going through, because I can only take so much in without it having that effect. We got a long text here. Let me look at this real quick. Robin says, I don't need anyone is the thought process that came into people due to the COVID lockdown. Absolutely. A huge amount of isolation did a huge amount of damage to a lot of people. It's very easy now to watch the service online. You miss fellowship, but you didn't need fellowship for almost 2 years or so, we think. I see a lot of anger as we come out of lockdown. Absolutely. I tell you what, man, you see people coming out of lockdown, and even though you would think they'd be more rested, they'd be more in a better place, they're coming out of it just looking worn and beat down because that isolation absolutely ages you. And you could tell it more in our grandparents and some of those, in these facilities that you take them away from people and just the life goes out of their eyes. And good morning, Dad. It's good to see you here. All right. So name 2 areas in your marriage or family that seem to stimulate anger episodes between your family. 2 that I named were when you internalize everything they say, you make that your fault, like somehow that's my fault, not just the way. Because sometimes it's just a situation. Sometimes it's not even a fault thing. As C.S. Lewis would say, the medium between us is neutral. Sometimes I'm going uphill and you're going downhill just because of the direction we happen to be walking. And the other one, of course, is when you feel helpless to help the person and a sense of frustration as they vent to you comes up. Only vent to people you know can dump, right? Or you could put them in, or even put them in that mode. Hey, listen, I'm going to tell you this stuff. You can't fix it. I just need to tell somebody about it. And then you tell somebody about it and you just look at them and go, man, that stinks. And they're like, yep, that stinks. And you just agree that is just the worst. Sometimes, like Lamentation says, let him sit alone in silence, for the Lord has laid it upon him. Sometimes somebody's going through something, and I'm just going to sit next to him. Don't have any words for you, don't have any great advice or, sky opening up, but I'm going to be here, and I'm going to say, man, that situation stinks. I'm sorry you're going through it. All right. Disagreements are normal and even inevitable in marriage and in families. Consider the following to help you and your spouse. Use anger constructively in your marriage. Now, we're going beyond what we did last night in the class, and we will cover this next week in the class on Wednesday night. But for today, we're going to do we've got a couple of steps. First, learn how to manage conflict by admitting you are angry. Come clean about it. Recognize the feeling. I say it's a lot like potty training. You can't potty train a child until they understand before they're going to use the bathroom. Like what happens is they go through a phase of they don't care that they're using the bathroom. Then the next phase is, okay, now mom and dad obviously want me to do something with this. Wait, I'm going to the bathroom, but they're already going, and it doesn't matter because they're already doing it. But then they develop the phase where they're like, okay, I'm about to go to the bathroom, and that's when potty training really happens, because you could teach them once they have the desire before it happens to go and make sure you're doing it in the right way. And unfortunately, there are a whole lot of people, even people who claim the name of Christ, who have never learned to stop pooping on everybody. Right? Not everybody's job is to change your diaper and to wipe your bottom. And at some point, you have to learn to take and use these things constructively, or put them in the right place, or do it in such a way so that it's not everybody else's issue to make it right for you. Amen? All right. It says, first, deal with your anger, right? So learn how to manage conflict by, one, admit you're angry. Two, deal with it, right? How can it help? Like, if you're angry, is there a reason you're angry that will help you get through this situation? Or are you angry about something that you can't change and you're just going to have to submit to the Lord and just give it to him? It says talk about the skills that learned in the previous session. So 4 things to do when you're angry. 1, check your temperature, right? That check your temperature is that self-awareness. Am I angry? How angry am I? What's making me angry? What's going on here? How come I'm in this issue? 2, control your thoughts. The Bible says take every thought captive, right? That not every thought deserves expression. Not every thought deserves the light of day. That you've got to take some of those thoughts and say, well, that's a thought, and you put it on the shelf and you move on with your life, because that thought doesn't deserve any more of your brain cycles than it's already taken. 3, find the source, right? Meaning, look at the thing, try to figure out what it is that's causing this to happen. You know, if something was wrong with your body and you're feeling pain, right, you want to figure out why that pain is happening. Now, when you're 49, stuff hurts all the time, and sometimes for no reason. Yeah, struggle food was pinto beans and mac and cheese. Yeah, Dad, I remember pinto beans. I still don't like pinto beans. Or black-eyed peas or lima beans. I don't like most of the things in the bean family. I'm going to be honest. All right. But it says, right, find the source. You know, if something is hurting, figure out why it's hurting. You know, like if my foot hurts after I'm playing pickleball, then I start putting like an extra cushion on my sole. Or if my back hurts, I run the massager on my back or something like that, because there's a reason why it hurts. I've overexerted it. Something has happened, right? And we don't do that emotionally sometimes. If something is happening, get to the source, figure out why it's happening, and fix it at the source. And then 4th, consider or plan your response. Instead of your response just being this vomitous, you know, blah, everything blah, right, going on, you know, just every bad word, evil thought that comes into your head, blah, 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 just coming out. Figure out what it is that you need to say, especially if you brought somebody else in to work on this, especially if you're talking to your spouse. Plan out, okay, to get where I want to go, these are the things that need to happen. This is what I'm going to say, versus just throwing it out there. All right, then it says, commit yourself to being slow to get angry. Like the Bible says, be slow to speak and slow to wrath. It's okay to be wrath. It's okay to get to the wrath part. You're going to need that sometimes, but be slow to get there. Don't just jump into it and throw it at everybody. Ask yourself, how will the presence of Christ in my life affect the way I respond to my mate and the situation? You are, if you are a Christian, a disciple of Christ, his representative on earth, and you need to look at this and say, if I do what I want to do, does that make Christ look better or look worse? I've said this in church many times. There are some people, I wish you would shut up about being a Christian. Don't tell anybody, because every time you tell them you're a Christian, we look worse, right? If you're not a disciple following after the character of Christ, shut up, right? Like, don't call yourself one. Or if you're a Christian and you're just in that place, you know what? You can't go wrong sometimes with just going ahead and being silent until you get to a place where you can speak about it more rationally, because you've got to take into account that people see Jesus when they see you, and if they see you angry and blowing up and throwing stuff and mad and, you know, flipping out in traffic or whatever, they're going to see Christ that way. And one of my big prayers is always that I don't do anything that brings shame onto the name or image of Christ, right? He is the answer. He is the love. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And anything that I do that tarnishes that image is just, it's just disastrous. And I think we've gone too long in our culture allowing people who call themselves Christians to absolutely make a mockery out of the name of Jesus. When the Bible says don't take the name of the Lord in vain, it's not just talking about, don't use his name as a swear word, but don't do anything that brings shame on to the image of God. All right. Learn how to hold back your anger. Think ahead to avoid anger-causing situations. If you know things that tend to make you angry, work on not letting that thing make you angry. Here's the thing. Life is going to continue to be life. The devil's going to continue to be the devil. There are going to continue to be things that are going to try and poke at you and get to you and move you. And you've just got to learn how to deal with that, because that is going to be life and it's never going to stop. I will tell you this. If people know they can get a reaction out of you, they will not stop trying to get a reaction out of you for their own amusement. And so you have to figure out how not to react at everything that other people do. Make up your mind not to let everything bother you. Self-giving love means you will do what you can to remove irritating situations and unnecessary conflict from your spouse's life at all possible. You are responsible for helping your spouse get over their anger, right? Sometimes you just need to make them aware of it. Sometimes they're going to say angry things because they're trying to hurt you, and you're going to look them in the eye and say, you're saying that because you're trying to hurt me, but I understand the person you are, and this isn't who you are, and I'm going to wait till the real you comes back. Right? I mean, put it back on them. You need to work on this thing that you're going through. Wherever you're at, it's not about me. And here's the thing, as an angry person, especially the explosive type, will try to make it all about why your actions have caused their life to be the way their life is. And what you can look them in the eye and says, you're angry not because of me, you're angry because of you, because there's something going on that you're not dealing with, and it's certainly not this, right? Keep in mind, these are all generalizations. Specific arguments can be about specific things. I'm not denying that. I'm just trying to give you some ways to work with this, and especially in marriage. Do I need to let this go? Oh, I tell that to Kristen about not letting everything bother me. I'll walk in sometimes because I'll just have a thought that's just going through my head and just rolling through my head. And I'll just come and say, honey, this is what I keep thinking about. This is what's going on in my head. Do I need to, is this a thing, or is this just the enemy poking at me? Is this just my thought life being out of control? Is this the thing I really need to worry about, or is this something that I can let go? It's important to have a person that you can actually say those sorts of things with. Penny says, I am grateful for the study. Thank you, Pastor David. B1, anger is harmful to my well-being emotionally and physically. It's hard on one's body, and it takes its toll on your health. You're right. It's absolutely physically exhausting. I mean, it's hard just dealing with it every day, especially when you feel like the situation is not going to be resolved. And sometimes it can't be resolved. Sometimes it's that type of situation that you're going to have to struggle with it for a while. And if you have a person who can understand that and just sit beside you and say, yeah, that stinks. Let's go grab a soda. Let's go grab a pizza, whatever. My wife and her friend, they'll be like, let's go eat our feelings, right? And sometimes I'm not saying do that all the time because, we got to work it off. I played pickleball last night for about 3 hours, and I thought, man, I deserve a cheeseburger. I've done this. I've done enough exercise now. I deserve that, right? What methods if you use to control anger in your marriage? The best, you can retreat, you can be quiet, you can isolate, you can fight back. The best response always, though, in marriage is submission. Husbands to wives, wives to husband, to come to that place where you lay down who you are, so that you can be something with them together, right? All right. Whenever a married couple cannot reach a resolution to an angry conflict, it is often due to the fact that one or both of them have sabotaged the dialogue. I'm going to be honest here. I am a huge sabotager of the dialogue. In fact, we didn't get to this place last night, and my wife is actually in our anger management class on Wednesday night, which makes it just so much more difficult for me, because you're like, can I say this? What is my wife going to say? Where are we going to go with this? And then, of course, there's the walk home where we're talking about, all of the things that were said. So I'm always trying to be both authentic and transparent and honest, and also fairly represent my wife's side of the arguments we've had. Because I'll be honest, I think every argument we've had has been her fault, and I think she thinks they've all been my fault. But I'm going to guess and say the truth is somewhere in between, that we are both at times at fault, and sometimes it is mostly one person's fault or the other. But either way, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, I still have to love her as Christ loved the church, and I have to work it out. So no matter how mad you get, like we have said many times, being mean to your spouse is like keying your own car. All right. So here are some things when you're arguing, when the gloves have come off, when it is throwdown time. We will not exaggerate or attack the other person during the course of disagreement. These are ways to fight fair, by the way. If you're going to fight fair, sometimes you need to fight, but you need to fight fair. There's a huge difference between sparring, so you understand how to fight, and actually going for the throat and trying to do harm to someone. And I don't think we realize this. So, for instance, when a dad wrestles with his boys, he's teaching a boy how to manage his strength and often manage his anger. When my brother and I would wrestle, there would be times where something would happen and you would get really hurt, and you had to learn to manage that anger because it was about, you weren't really trying to hurt them. There was just that sort of testing of strength. There's a way that in marriage, the argument can be that sort of wrestling with the issue, wrestling with each other, testing your strength, but you have to learn how to do it without causing damage, harm, or hurting the other person. This keeps skipping in time. It goes back 5 minutes or up. I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know what to tell you there, Robin. That could be Facebook. That could be me. I don't know. But here are some things to fight fair. Do not exaggerate and do not attack the other person during the course of the disagreement, right? Don't make it bigger than it is. Do not try to emphasize your point by making it like whatever has happened is the worst thing ever to happen in history. Understand, have some perspective. Maybe this is just something that's bugging you right now, and there's a chance that if you just let it go, it wouldn't even be bothering you in another hour. There's always that chance, right? And two, don't attack the other person during the course of the disagreement. Don't make it about their character. Don't make it about who they are. And you are just messed up, and that's why you do this, and that makes me angry. Once you do that, you are no longer dealing with the situation that has made you angry. What you are doing is you are attacking that person until they isolate themselves. When you get into that battle, the battle becomes this: which one of you is going to hurt the other one so bad that the other person is quiet? That's what the battle becomes. That's the artillery duel. That's the boom, 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 until somebody finally goes home wounded, right? I will stick to the specific issue. What is the thing, right? That's where I got to be self-aware. Identify the source of the anger. Work on the source of the anger. Even if it was the other person's actions, attacking them is not going to get them to change their actions. You are never going to criticize somebody so bad. You're never going to tell them what a piece of garbage they are until they're finally like, you know what? I am absolutely garbage. You are completely right. I'm going to stop doing that thing because I didn't realize how garbage I am. That is not in everything I have seen as a pastor. That is just not how it works. You are not going to beat them down until they realize how much righter you are than them. That's just not the case. So stick to the specific issue, the thing that you're actually trying to work out. It says, I will take several seconds to formulate words so that I can be accurate. Not the first thought, not that vomit of words, but actually take time. Figure out what it is that you can say that will actually help the situation. Not just what you want to say, not just the most, and I'll be honest, I'm very clever. At clever people, we have this thing that sometimes, can I tell you this? Can I be honest? Sometimes when I'm in an argument, even if it's not how I feel, but it's really funny or clever to say, sometimes I will say that thing because it's funny or clever to say, and it's not even how I feel. And I have been punished by that, by having clever children. And my clever children will occasionally say things, and they'll say something, and I'll look at them like, that's not even how you feel. You're just saying that because that's a funny word or a clever phrase to put right in there. So, the Lord brings those things back to you. You need to be careful about that, right? It says, I will take several seconds to formulate words so I can be accurate. Next, I will consider the consequences of what I say before I say it, right? Is what I'm going to say going to damage them in a way that's going to damage our relationship, that's going to push them further away from me, push them further away from the Lord, take me further away from the Lord? Because how can the Lord bless somebody, right? The book of James says, how can salt and fresh water come out of the same spring? How do blessings and cursings come out of the same mouth? How do you bless God in your praise and worship and then fight with your wife all the way home in the car, right? How do you, raise your hands and, oh, Lord, you're so good, and our God is an awesome God, and all those sorts of things, and then you turn around and say, look at that idiot pulled out in front of me, right? Those two things should not come out of the same mouth. Not me. It's the Bible. If you want to argue with the Bible, I got bad news for you. All right. We're going to finish with this one because we are almost at 45 minutes. So this is a very long, meaty lesson in this one. So we will finish the rest of this next week. But we'll finish with this one. I will not use the words always, all the time, everyone, nothing. As soon as this phrase comes out of your mouth, you are admitting whether they know it or not. Now that you hear me say that, when you hear me say this, you will now know this information forever. Forever, don't use words like, you always do this. Right? As soon as you use the phrase, you always do this, one, you're not talking about a specific issue. You're attacking that person, and you're using these big words that are not true, because all generalizations are false. They don't always do that. But right now, because you're angry, you feel like they always do, and so you're telling them they always do. But what you're not trying to reconcile, you're not trying to make it right, you're not trying to work on the issue. Now you're in attack mode. You always do this, right? All the time. I'm always doing this all the time because of you. Right? When you start using those big general phrases, just understand you are admitting that you have lost the argument, you have lost your way, and you are no longer working on the problem. If anything should check your temperature as soon as you start using that nothing, everyone, all the time, things that cannot possibly be true. I always say that, like, if somebody says, if you go down that road fast, you're going to get a ticket. I'm always like, well, that's not actually true. That means if I speed in that area where there's an increased police presence, there's a higher probability that I will get a ticket. But that doesn't mean that's an always statement. And that drives me crazy when people are inaccurate in their language like that. And yet, I find myself, when I am mad about something, using words like, you always do that, and it's always this way, and it always turns out like that. And it is simply not true. So from here on out, now you know whenever you go into those big words, those big phrases, those big kind of things, that you have lost your way and you need to find your way back to the path that leads to resolution instead of the path that just leads to war. So with that, there was a lot of information today, a lot to go through. I hope it blessed you. I hope you found some things in here that you can use. I hope it makes your marriage and your relationships better. And most of all, I hope that it brings you closer to the Lord. So, love you guys. Have an awesome day. It's time to go unload a truck for Jesus, for the food pantry. Love you guys. Be real. Be loved. Be one.